long as you wish. Aileen Evans will be our first speaker this afternoon. After her graduation from Colby in 2012, Aileen took off for France to teach in a high school in Arles. As she established relationships with people in the community, she was able to propose an English program at a local private elementary school to begin the following school year. She taught then at this school during her second year in France while contemplating graduate school programs in international education. She is now in California pursuing a joint master's degree in international education. She's at the International Education Management and Public Administration. She's doing the International, Education Management and Public Administration program at the Monterey Institute of International Studies.
First, I'd like to say thank you to Laura, Professor Palienko, and Audrey for inviting me here to speak. I'm delighted to be back after 2.5 years, even after taking a red eye from San Francisco last night. So please bear with me. I can't imagine not having studied French at Colby because it has had such a direct impact on my life since graduation and will continue to, I hope. This lady right here, Professor Palienko, somehow talked me into being a French major 5 years ago after I returned from Dijon my freshman year. And in all honesty, I didn't expect to continue with French at that point. But this was the best decision of my life. It allowed me to go abroad again to Senegal and to pursue my career in France afterwards. As Professor Palienko mentioned, I participated in the teaching assistant program in France, which is a program organized by the French Ministry of Education. I was living in the south of France in Arles, and I was a teaching assistant in a high school. I worked with small groups of students on oral English and in the larger classroom in collaboration with the teachers. So, as you can probably tell, knowledge of a foreign language was required for my job. My language skills also helped me develop relationships abroad within the community where I was living, and that has had the most impact on me. When I was living in Arles, I was with a host family, and with them during my first year there, I was able to create an English program in a local elementary school that started the following year in 2013. Because I got to create this program, my second year in France was so much more satisfying than the work I was doing in the high school. In my second year in France, I was contemplating what I would like to do afterwards, and I knew that I wanted to continue with French somehow, work in education, but not necessarily in teaching. So how could I do this? I looked into graduate school and realized that there's a whole field of international education that I didn't even know existed when I was at Colby. So I am now pursuing a graduate degree at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, which is a graduate school of Middlebury College, soon to be named the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. And my degree is in public administration and international education management. I've been in this program for 2 months. It's just gotten underway, but I love it. What I like most is the international focus of the school. The Monterey Institute has both the translation and interpretation program and degrees in international policy and management. And everyone at this institute speaks a foreign language, which is really unique. Upon graduation in a couple years, I hope to work in study abroad and student exchange as a means of affording other people the same experiences that I've had through my time at Colby. I've already discovered that the field of international education is so broad and there are so many opportunities in this growing field. So I was also asked to talk about tangible ways you as students could use your language as you look for jobs and graduate. My best advice would be to go abroad. I'm sure many of you will study abroad during your junior year, but the best thing you can do is to continue doing it after you graduate. You'll be fresh out of school looking for something different to do, and this is the best time to go. Don't be intimidated, don't feel like you have to find your dream job right away, and explore your options because you may not be able to go abroad again 20 years from now. And I guess the other advice would be that you realize that you will eventually forge a path. Little did I know 2 years ago that I would be in graduate school now studying international education management, which I didn't even know existed. So ways to go abroad. I would say the best, or one of the way I know, is to go teach English. There are many government-sponsored opportunities to do that, one being the teaching assistant program in France, others being through Fulbright or through the JET program in Japan, for example. I know a lot of students at the Monterey Institute that have done the JET program, and some of these programs don't even require basic knowledge of a foreign language. You can go to Japan and learn Japanese and teach English at the same time. And so it's a good opportunity to even pick up a third language. And many universities are opening branch campuses abroad and looking for English teachers. So there are other non-government sponsored opportunities as well. Another option for going abroad would be the Peace Corps, which I'm sure you all have heard about as well. And the other advice I would give is that visas can be very difficult. So going through a government-sponsored program or a program that's established is certainly a good way to go, because countries will want to sponsor you for a visa, will not want to sponsor you for a visa if a national in that country can do the same job. So doing these programs that are teaching English, for example, those are good opportunities and require English. And then other ways to go, I guess, would be graduate school. There are a lot of international graduate schools and degrees in foreign language if that's something you'd like to pursue. So I've only been at Colby for 2 years, but that's what I've been doing, and I'm going to pass it on now. My response is going to be very different here. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, and the professors, that translation and interpretation has become highly professionalized these days, and I have figured that out by my graduate institution. Half the programs are translation, interpretation, and localization management. And I had never really considered this for myself. I consider myself fluent in French, but I realized that I would have to do 2 years of study to actually become a professional translator or interpreter. If you would like more information on that, I can talk to you about the programs at my school. But, yeah. I don't know if anyone has a response to that comment.
To the translation comment?
Yeah, if you agree with me, or... Because clearly you've had experiences with it without a translation degree.
I don't work in translation. I don't think that our degree is done this year. Is anyone else here from the teaching staff that could speak to the translation?
I would just suggest that there's a difference between becoming an interpreter-translator who's marketing that as a skill and the vast need, I think, in every country for their English language publications to come out sounding like English, which doesn't happen when native speakers oftentimes, when they're translating, because it's no fault of the native speakers, but it's a different syntax, a different presentation of language. So I'm thinking particularly in news media that it may be a less professionalized slot and more of a communicative spot. And particularly you wouldn't be relying on utter fluency in the other language. It would be your native fluency in English.
And I agree with that. The translators and interpreters at my graduate school go on to be interpreters for the UN. So that's a very different kind of professional career path then. For me, I studied in Dijon my freshman year. So I was 18, and I was young at the time. So I didn't really understand the importance of forging relationships with people in my community. I was young and wanted to make friends with the other people in my group, so we would have a group back on campus when we got here in January. And so I regret not doing more within the Dijon community. And so taking those thoughts with me junior year, I went to Senegal, where I had wonderful relationships with my host family of 9 people. And again, I was also caught in the American bubble, as we say, but the best advice I have is to branch out as much as you can and leave that American bubble and forge those relationships, because you will still be in contact with those people. Like Carter said too, I spent the last 2 years in France, and I arrived in Arles knowing absolutely nobody. So that was a very different experience than studying abroad with a group of Americans. And I'm still in contact with many people back in France. I became the goddaughter of somebody I met there after 2 years. So those relationships become so special, and that's what I've appreciated the most with my knowledge and experience in French.
Good classes that you're excited about to make the transition easier?
So I was wondering, Ken, you said something about the importance of English in your professional field for publications.
Yep.
And Carter, we were speaking earlier just how superbly skilled Germans are in communicating in English. Well, they're not. So, I mean, this idea of globalizing pathways and the function of language in that, how important really is it for us today? Because we assume, coming from the US, or many of us assume coming from the US, that we can do this globalization just perfectly fine with handling our English skills, and that's all we need, and everybody can communicate just fine with us. How much of a role does it really play for us to know the language, and by extension what you've all sort of proven, the culture, right? I mean, it's not just the language, but the language is the avenue, the pathway into understanding people. Do you have some anecdotes that you can share, sort of on that sort of serious questions, to lighten that up a little bit?
Yeah, I've never met a German that doesn't speak good English, but I can tell you that in France that is not the case whatsoever. So I learned that learning a language helps build intercultural communication skills. And I've talked a lot about relationships here, but that is key. Like you said, you can't have an in-depth conversation with somebody in English if they don't speak English very well. And I've also realized in my time abroad that language is implicated in culture, and culture is implicated in language, and those two things go hand in hand, and you can't separate them. So to really get down and deep in a subject, or be integrated and immersed where you're living, language is essential. For me, I don't know how common this experience is, but in Senegal I was really operating on 3 levels of language, because I had to learn Wolof, which is the local language in Dakar, and there are many other local languages throughout the very small country. And French was Wolof is my, I guess, first language, French was my second language, and English was my third language. And so I really had to rely on my French. I was learning Wolof in French, which was weird to start with. And I had to rely on my French, very infrequently my English, to understand Wolof. I had people say to me, "Oh, you're from France," and that made me feel very, very good about French. But in the end, I realized that my French was very, very important in this context, because it is the language, the educated national language in Senegal, where English isn't. Whereas in France, I was falling back on English if I didn't know something. And so I guess one story was I was with my friends up in northern Senegal, and we were trying to get to a town called Podor, and we were in the middle of nowhere with a Peace Corps volunteer who had showed us his village or his hut, and the only way to get to this place was to hitchhike. So I didn't tell my parents, and I We stood on the side of the road, many cars came by. We thought maybe we could like show the bottom of our legs because that would attract men. You can't show your legs in Senegal. And finally a juice truck stopped and we spoke French with him, got in the back of his truck, and 20 minutes later we were in Podor. And so my Wolof was not good, but my French was really essential in these contexts when you realize that English is not universal.